Ethan Miller was the kind of man people call steady. 34, broad-shouldered from years of hauling freight at the dockyards near Seattle. He loved his routine: black coffee at dawn, greasy breakfast at Ruby's Diner, 12 hours of moving containers and solving problems nobody else could fix. Then home to his wife, Hannah. 31, sweet laugh, soft voice, the kind that could calm him down when the world's noise got too loud. Or so he thought. For 5 years, Ethan thought they were building the life they'd whispered about back when they were kids in his dad's truck. A modest house at the edge of town, 2 used cars in the drive, Sunday dinners at his father's cabin by the lake. Ethan trusted easy, maybe too easy. He believed love was a promise you didn't break, no matter what storms hit you. But something shifted last winter. Tiny cracks, hairline fractures in what he thought was rock solid. Hannah started working late. She'd come home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. She said it was the new manager at the coffee shop where she did the books. Ethan believed her. Why wouldn't he? His father, Hank Miller, big man, bigger laugh, 60 but still built like he could wrestle down a bear, told him once, "Women drift sometimes. Don't smother her, son. She'll come home." So Ethan waited, trusted. Try not to think about the tension under her smile or how she flinched when he touched her shoulder too suddenly. He didn't see it coming. Not the way it did. It was the night of his father's birthday. Hannah insisted they throw a small party at Hank's cabin. Just the 3 of them, whiskey, cake, old stories by the fire. Ethan thought it was sweet. He even let Hank pour him double shots, bragging about old times on the oil rigs, while Hannah disappeared into the kitchen with the dishes. Ethan heard them laugh together behind the door. He smiled. He liked that they got along. If he'd known what that laughter really meant, he'd have kicked the door off its hinges right then and there. But the truth? The truth hid until it was good and ready to tear his ribs open. The night at Hank's cabin ended like any other birthday for the old man. A bit too much bourbon, Ethan helping him to bed while Hannah washed the last glasses. Ethan never noticed the way she lingered at Hank's bedroom door before he pulled her back down the hall with a gentle nudge. He chalked it up to her caring heart. She always looked out for his dad like family should. They drove home under a clear sky, stars dusted above the highway. Hannah leaned her head against the passenger window, humming softly to a tune only she could hear. Ethan reached over once to squeeze her knee. She didn't flinch exactly, just shifted her leg away and mumbled something about being tired. 2 days later, Ethan caught the first sign. He found Hank's old flannel in their laundry basket, the same faded red one Hank wore up at the cabin. Except this one smelled like Hannah's vanilla shampoo and her rose lotion. Ethan held it up, frowning, trying to picture how it could have gotten mixed in. He called Hank, asked if he wanted it back. Hank just chuckled. "Must have left it in the truck bed, son. Toss it next time you're up here." So Ethan did. He folded it, pushed it to the back of his closet with a note to himself to drop it off next Sunday. That Sunday never came. The next few weeks, Ethan felt Hannah drift further. She'd stand under the shower too long, hide her phone under her pillow. Whenever he asked how work was going, she'd change the subject to bills, or her mother's sore knee, or the dog she wanted to adopt. All small things, tiny lies wrapped in a smile. Ethan told himself not to pry. He remembered Hank's words, "Don't smother her. She'll come home." So he didn't smother. He waited. He held his tongue when she slipped out to help a friend at 11 p.m. He turned up the TV volume so he wouldn't hear the soft buzz of her phone in the kitchen. It all snapped the night he found the receipt. 2 glasses of whiskey, a hotel an hour outside town, a handwritten note on the back. Same time next week? It wasn't the manager's name on the receipt. It was Hank's. Ethan sat at the kitchen table long after the receipt slipped from his hand. The cheap paper lay there like a live wire, the words burning through his brain on repeat. Same time next week. He ran a finger over Hank's familiar scrawl, big block letters, the same he'd seen on birthday cards and old tool labels in the garage. He wanted it to be a mistake. He wanted to believe it was some stupid misunderstanding. Maybe Hank had loaned the truck to a buddy. Maybe the hotel messed up. But the knot in his chest told him the truth. That knot, tight and cold as a winter nail in his ribs, whispered the one thing he couldn't shove aside. Hannah lied. His own father lied. He thought back. All the late-night errands, the sly laughter behind closed doors of the cabin, the way Hank had clapped him on the shoulder that night, sloppy drunk, eyes too bright. "You're a good man, son. Never change, all right." Ethan thought it was praise. Now it tasted like a joke. Hannah came home just after midnight. She flicked on a hallway light, froze when she saw him sitting there in the dim kitchen glow. Her keys jingled too loud in her hand. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Just that tiny guilty hitch in her breath that told him everything before she even spoke. "Hey," she said finally, forcing her voice soft. "Why are you still up?" Ethan didn't lift his eyes yet. He kept them fixed on the receipt. His voice sounded calmer than he felt. "Where were you tonight?" She swallowed. He heard it, thick, careful. "I told you, I was with Claire. Her sister's 6OI. He lifted the receipt, turned it so the ink faced her like a mirror. "Try again." The hallway clock ticked behind her. 1 beat. 2. The silence stretched until Hannah's shoulders slumped. She didn't reach for the paper. She didn't reach for him. She just closed her eyes, her free hand covering her mouth like she might hold back the truth if she pressed hard enough. Ethan stood, the chair legs scraping the tile. For a second he thought he might shout, rage, break every glass in the house. But he didn't. He just stepped past her, grabbed his coat off the peg, and paused at the door. When he looked back, Hannah's eyes were wet, but she still didn't speak. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. Ethan didn't slam the door. He left it open behind him, a promise that this wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The cold air outside hit Ethan like a slap that didn't sting enough. He sucked in deep breaths, hoping they'd clear his head, but all they did was sharpen the edges of what he'd just seen. The street was dead quiet, the kind of night when even the neighborhood dogs knew to stay silent. Ethan's truck sat at the curb, same as always. He slid behind the wheel, hands trembling as he jammed the keys in the ignition. The engine rumbled awake, a steady growl in the dark. For a moment he just sat there, knuckles white on the steering wheel. He thought about driving until the sun came up, until the pain in his chest dulled enough to breathe. But the image of Hank's handwriting wouldn't let him go. Same time next week. He pictured his father's grin, the birthday toast, the way Hannah giggled when Hank teased her about spilling wine. It was all right there, hidden in plain sight while he'd stood there like a fool. Instead of pulling away, he turned the truck toward the old Miller cabin, the same place Hank spent every other weekend, tinkering with his fishing gear, playing at being the perfect dad when he felt like showing up. It was an hour's drive into the woods, and Ethan took every curve faster than he should have, chewing the inside of his cheek raw just to stay calm. He didn't have a plan. Not yet. He just knew he needed to see his father's face, needed to look him in the eye, and watch the lie slip out of his mouth like oil on water. When he finally turned down the gravel lane, the cabin's porch light glowed warm through the trees. Hank's old pickup was parked out front, a cooler still strapped in the bed. Ethan killed the headlights and coasted in, tires crunching over fallen pine needles. He sat there for a minute, engine ticking as it cooled, his breath fogging the window. He could see Hank's shadow moving behind the curtain, the familiar slope of his shoulders, the old man humming to himself like he hadn't just lit his own son's world on fire. Ethan stepped out into the brittle air, boots sinking into wet dirt. He could smell the lake in the dark, that damn promise of secrets carried out past the docks. He climbed the porch steps slow, careful not to wake the whole forest. Then he lifted his fist, let it hover over the door Hank always left unlocked for him. A son should never have to knock. But tonight, Ethan knocked anyway. The knock landed like thunder in the small cabin. For a few seconds, Ethan heard only the low hum of Hank's TV inside, the muffled chatter of late-night sports highlights, the flicker of static. Then Hank's heavy boots shuffled across the creaking floorboards, each step slow and steady like he had all the time in the world. The door swung open, spilling warm light onto the porch. Hank Miller stood there in sweatpants and an old flannel robe, half-buttoned. His hair stuck out in stubborn gray wisps, eyes still bright even in the middle of the night. "Son," he rumbled, voice rough with sleep and whiskey. "What are you doing all the way out here? You okay?" Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at him, really looked at him, and waited for the weight of his silence to do what words couldn't. Hank squinted, frowning like he was piecing together a riddle. He scratched his jaw, then stepped back, gesturing Ethan inside like nothing was wrong. "Come in, boy. It's cold as a witch's heart out there." Ethan stepped over the threshold, boots heavy on the old wooden floor. The cabin smelled like cedar and stale bourbon. the same scent that clung to his father's hunting gear and Sunday jackets. He remembered helping Hank stain these walls when he was 17, laughing about nothing, never guessing he'd stand here one day, wanting to tear them down with his bare hands. Hank settled into his armchair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "So, what's got you driving out here in the middle of the damn night?" "Hannah, okay." The name tasted bitter on Ethan's tongue. He walked to the coffee table, pulled the crumpled receipt from his pocket, and set it down between them. The little slip of paper sat there like a loaded gun. Hank's eyes flicked to it, once then twice. He picked it up, turned it over in his thick fingers. His lips moved, tracing the ink. For a heartbeat, Ethan thought he'd try to deny it, laugh it off like some old man's joke. But Hank just leaned back, the old recliner squeaking under his weight. He let out a sigh so deep it rattled through his ribs. When he looked up, his eyes were flat. Not sorry, not afraid. Just empty. "Guess you know now, huh?" Hank said, his voice softer than Ethan had ever heard it. Didn't plan for it to go on this long. Ethan felt something inside him split, but he didn't shout. Not yet. Ethan stood there, staring down at the man who'd taught him how to ride a bike, how to swing a hammer, how to stand his ground when the world pushed too hard. Now that same man looked so small, sunk into that old recliner. Not ashamed, not begging for forgiveness, just tired and stripped of excuses. "How long?" Ethan asked. His voice didn't sound like his own. It scraped out of him like gravel. Hank rubbed his palms on his knees. He didn't meet Ethan's eyes. "Started after you two had that fight last winter. She came up here bawling her eyes out. Said you were working too much. Said she felt alone." Ethan barked a humorless laugh. "So, you decided to keep her company?" Hank winced. For a flicker, there was something like regret, but not enough of it to matter. Wasn't supposed to happen. First time, she was drunk. I was drunk. Next thing I knew, it was a habit. A habit. The word made Ethan's gut twist. Like it was just a bad patch of drinking or a pack of cigarettes tucked in a glove box. Not a betrayal that cracked his ribs from the inside out. Hank looked up at him then. The same blue eyes Ethan had inherited, but hated now. "I was lonely too, son. Your mother's been gone a long time. You think I wanted to fall for her? Hell, I'd trade it back if I could." Ethan's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles ached. "You didn't just fall for her. You lied to me. Every Sunday dinner. Every toast. Every handshake when you looked me in the eye and told me she was family." Hank stood suddenly, pushing himself up with a grunt. He stepped closer, one hand half raised like he might touch Ethan's shoulder. "Son, you gotta understand. Don't call me that." Ethan's voice cracked through the room like a whip. The silence that followed was so sharp the old clock on the mantel sounded like a drumbeat. Outside, the wind rattled the cabin walls. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called, low and mournful. Hank lowered his hand. He looked older than he ever had, shoulders sagging, robe hanging off him like a costume he didn't deserve to wear. "What are you going to do now, boy?" Ethan stepped back, his boots thudding heavy on the planks. He didn't have an answer yet, but he knew one thing. Forgiveness wouldn't live in this room tonight. Ethan didn't stay to hear anymore. He stepped around Hank, his shoulder brushing the man's flannel sleeve like it burned him. At the door, he paused, not to look back, but because something inside him needed to mark this moment. The second his father became just a man who could break him like anyone else. "You know," Ethan said, voice low but clear, "I'd have forgiven you for a lot. Drinking. The way you used to vanish for weeks when I was a kid. But this..." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. He left the door wide open when he stepped out. The night swallowed him whole, the cold air slicing clean through the heat that wanted to rise in his throat. He half expected Hank to follow him onto the porch, to beg, to shout, to try and wrap this in one more lie. But the only sound behind him was the old recliner creaking back under Hank's weight. The gravel crunched under Ethan's boots as he stalked to his truck. He slammed the door so hard the window shivered in its frame. For a moment, he just sat there, hands braced on the wheel, forehead pressed to the leather. The cabin's porch light blurred through the tears he didn't want to let fall. He wouldn't give either of them that piece of him. He turned the key. The engine coughed awake, the radio crackling static before settling on some late-night country ballad that made his teeth grind. He killed it with a jab of his finger, needing the silence more than he needed the comfort of a sad man's song. When he finally pulled out, the tires spat gravel behind him like a promise. He didn't know where he was driving. just that he couldn't go home yet. Not back to the walls that still smelled like Hannah's perfume, their wedding photo grinning down from the mantel like a curse. He drove through the sleeping streets until dawn cracked the sky open with streaks of pale gray. Somewhere past the diner where they'd first kissed as teenagers, he pulled over by the side of the road. His truck idled while he watched the sunrise burn off the night's bitter taste. In that pale light, Ethan made himself a quiet promise. They'd think they could sweep this under the rug, pretend it never happened. But Hannah and Hank were about to learn what it felt like to stand alone in the same cold they'd pushed him into. They thought he'd be broken, but Ethan Miller had never been so awake in his life. Ethan didn't go home that morning. He let the sun creep higher while he sat behind the wheel, staring out at the old parking lot of an abandoned grocery store. Rusted carts, cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through concrete. It felt right. Broken, but still standing. By the time he finally pulled back into town, the world had woken up. Kids on bikes, joggers with earbuds, sprinklers ticking over tidy lawns. It all looked the same. Too the same. Like his life hadn't just split down the middle overnight. He parked 3 houses down from his own, engine ticking as it cooled. From there, he could see his front porch, the chipped railing he'd been meaning to fix, the wind chime Hannah bought at the farmer's market last spring. He spotted her through the living room window, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling Hank, probably whispering frantic half-truths, trying to stitch this thing back together before Ethan could rip it open for good. He didn't move, just watched her run a hand through her hair, stop by the window, squint out at the street, but she didn't see him. Maybe she didn't want to see him yet. Maybe she still believed he'd roll over, forgive her like she was some stray cat that scratched him by mistake. Ethan cracked the window, let the crisp morning air wash over him. He could have walked in right then, thrown the door open, tossed the receipt at her feet, demanded she look him in the eye and tell him every filthy detail. But that wasn't good enough. Not anymore. He pulled out his phone instead, scrolled through his contacts until he found the one name that felt right. Mason Grant. Old high school friend, local real estate guy, rumor magnet. Mason knew everyone, heard everything. If there was dirt to dig up, Mason would find a backhoe big enough to expose every rotten root. Ethan tapped out a single message. Need to talk. Urgent. The reply came less than a minute later. Your place or mine? Ethan stared at the house, at Hannah still pacing like a cage thing behind the glass. Then he put the truck in gear. Not my place, he thought. Not hers either. He pulled away, leaving her shadow frozen behind him. If she wanted secrets, Ethan would give her a lesson in what secrets could really do. Mason's office was wedged between a pawn shop and a vape store on the far side of town, the part Ethan hadn't driven through in months. The blinds were half drawn, the old neon sign buzzed like a hornet over the door. Ethan parked out front and killed the engine. For a second, he sat there, wondering if he was about to make everything worse. But the truth was already worse. He just needed the rest of it. Raw and ugly. No more shadows. Mason opened the door before Ethan even knocked. He hadn't changed much since high school. Same crooked grin, same hair slicked back like he thought it made him look older than 35. He wore a cheap suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up like he'd been working all night. Damn, Miller, Mason said, clapping him on the shoulder. You look like hell. Ethan pushed past him without a word and dropped into the cracked leather chair opposite the cluttered desk. Mason closed the door, flicked the blinds shut with a snap. So, Mason said, settling behind the desk and propping his boots on a box of dusty folders. What's so urgent you're blowing up my phone at dawn? Ethan didn't sugarcoat it. He told him everything. The receipt, the cabin, the knock on Hank's door, the way Hannah just stood there like she'd been caught stealing from a corner store instead of tearing out his heart. Mason's grin faded somewhere around the part about Hank. By the time Ethan finished, Mason was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, eyes sharp. Jesus. With your dad? Ethan nodded once, jaw tight. Mason let out a low whistle. All right. What'd you want from me? You want me to talk to a lawyer? Get dirt on her. On him. Ethan rubbed his palms together, the skin raw from gripping the wheel all night. I want everyone to know. I want her to feel what I felt. And him too. Mason nodded, the faint spark of mischief flickering behind his tired eyes. You know people are going to talk. Small town like this. It'll blow up quick. That's the point, Ethan said. They hid behind my back for months. Now I want out front. Bright daylight. Mason cracked his knuckles. Then you came to the right guy, brother. He slid a battered notepad across the desk. Give me everything. Dates, places, any weird details. The more, the better. Ethan took the pen. For the first time in hours, his hands felt steady. Ethan filled pages with shaky lines of ink. Dates he could remember. Excuses she'd fed him. Tiny things that felt harmless then, but made sense now. Mason sat back, watching him like a hawk, nodding every so often, asking questions that dug deeper than Ethan wanted to go. When did you first notice she was different? Did she ever take calls outside? Delete texts? Who else might have seen them together? Each answer peeled off another layer of his old life, exposing raw places he didn't know were still bleeding. By the time he dropped the pen, his wrist ached, and the notepad looked like a crime scene, full of crossed-out half-truths and dates that marked the death of his marriage long before he ever caught on. Mason flipped through it, whistling low. This is gold. You know how fast this'll spread once I plant the seeds? Hell, Hank's gonna have to crawl under that cabin for the rest of the year. Ethan forced out a humorless breath. I don't care about Hank's pride. I care about her looking me in the eye when she's got nowhere left to run. Mason grinned. Oh, she'll run. Just not far enough. He leaned over, tapping a line near the middle of the page. This hotel, that the same one she went to with him more than once. Ethan nodded, teeth grinding. He could picture that cheap carpet, the faded sign out by the highway. How many times had he driven past it without thinking twice? Mason scribbled something on his phone. All right, listen, I got a buddy at the front desk there. He owes me. I can get camera footage, receipts, timestamps. If she paid with a card, we'll have a paper trail that's solid as concrete. Ethan pushed back in his chair, every muscle stiff with anger that hadn't found a place to land yet. And then what? I just show it to her. Throw it at her feet. Mason's grin turned sharp. No, man. You do it smart. You show her when everyone's watching. When she can't spin it. Family dinner. Work party. Wherever she thinks she's safe. Ethan pictured it. Hannah standing in front of a room full of people, forced to admit who she really was. Part of him hated the thought. Part of him needed it. Mason snapped the notepad shut. You ready for that? This doesn't just burn her. It burns your old man too. Ethan looked him dead in the eye, then let it burn. When Ethan left Mason's office, the sun was high enough to bake the cracked sidewalk outside. He felt raw, like Mason had scraped the last layer of numbness off him and left him humming with too much truth to carry alone. He drove the long way back through town, windows down, letting the hot wind slap his face awake. His phone buzzed in the cup holder every few minutes. Messages from Hannah, the same apology on repeat. Where are you? Please come home. I can explain. I love you. Ethan didn't answer. He let her words pile up like junk, mail he'd never open. Instead of heading home, he turned toward the hardware store on the edge of town. Not because he needed tools, but because old Mr. Callahan, who ran the place, knew everyone, remembered everything, and, more importantly, liked to talk. If Hank and Hannah ever met up in public, someone like Callahan would have seen. Someone like Callahan loved to see. The bell over the door jangled when Ethan stepped inside. The place smelled like sawdust and old paint, the same as it had when he was a boy, following Hank through the aisles, learning which wrench did what. Callahan looked up from the counter, pushing his glasses up his nose. Ethan Miller. Been a minute, son. What brings you in today? Ethan forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey, Mr. Callahan. You got a sec? The old man gestured him over, leaning on the glass case, full of pocket knives and dusty batteries. Shoot. Ethan kept his voice casual, but his pulse thudded behind his ribs. You remember seeing my dad around here lately? With anyone? Callahan's bushy brows shot up. Your dad? Hank. Sure, he pops in. Always jawing about fishing or buying a new tarp. Why? Ethan tapped the counter with his thumb, pretending to study the knives. You ever see him with Hannah? Here. Or anywhere. Callahan hesitated, squinting at Ethan like he was testing the ground under thin ice. Then he sighed. Well, can't say I didn't, now that you mention it. A couple months back, saw him at Rosie's diner. Thought it was sweet at first. Father-in-law, daughter-in-law. But then I saw him again. Not at Rosie's. Out by Carter's Lake. Just the two of them. Thought maybe you were there too. But guess not. Ethan's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Yeah, guess not. Callahan leaned in closer, voice dropping. Everything all right, son? Ethan's laugh was sharp and empty. Not yet, but will be. He thanked Callahan, forced another polite smile, and stepped back into the heat. If Hannah wanted to pretend this was all in his head, she was about to see just how real it really was. Ethan sat in his truck with the window cracked, Callahan's words replaying like a broken tape. Out by Carter's Lake, that spot used to be his escape when he was 16, where he'd take Hannah back then, when they thought sneaking beers by the water made them rebels instead of kids playing grown-up. Now that lake felt poisoned. He imagined Hank's truck parked under the old pines, Hannah's laugh echoing across the water. The same laugh she'd used on him when she wanted something, back when it meant home and not betrayal. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Hannah. "We need to talk. Please. I'm scared." He read it twice, thumb hovering over reply. Then he dropped the phone face down on the seat. Not yet. He needed this to break her the way it broke him. Piece by piece, lie by lie, all in the open where she couldn't spin it. So he drove, past the old school where they first met, past the church where they'd said forever. The memories hit like shrapnel, but he took them all. Let them remind him why he couldn't let her bury this in sweet words and crocodile tears. By the time he pulled up to Mason's house, dusk was curling around the neighborhood like smoke. Mason was on his porch with a beer in one hand and his phone in the other, scrolling through the grainy hotel footage he'd promised Ethan. "Got what you wanted," Mason said as Ethan climbed the steps. He handed over his phone, screen bright in the settling dark. Security footage, Pine Grove Motel, March 2nd. Hannah's hair was unmistakable, even in black and white. Hank's broad shoulders next to her, his hand on her lower back. Like they owned that room. Like they owned him. Ethan didn't flinch. He just watched. Let every frame sear itself into his memory. Mason set his beer down with a soft clink. "You sure about this, man? When you drop this bomb, there's no going back to normal." Ethan's eyes never left the screen. "That's the point. There isn't normal anymore." Mason leaned back, grin crooked. "Then wins the show." Ethan slipped Mason's phone into his jacket pocket. "Tomorrow. Family barbecue. Her parents. Mine. Everyone who thought we were perfect. They'll all see the truth at once." Mason let out a low whistle. Hell of a way to serve ribs, Miller. Ethan didn't smile. He felt the anger settle into something colder, a calm he could stand on while the storm came. "Let her bring the plates," he said quietly. "I'll bring the fire." Ethan barely slept that night. He lay on the couch in the spare room of Mason's house, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazy circles overhead. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. Hank's hand on Hannah's back, her leaning in like she belonged to him instead of Ethan. By dawn, the house smelled like stale beer and cold takeout. Mason had crashed on a recliner with the TV still glowing, soft infomercials pitching miracle knives and diet pills to an empty room. Ethan slipped out without waking him. He drove home slow. The town was still quiet, the Sunday sun creeping through the trees like it didn't know what he was about to do. When he pulled up to his own driveway, Hannah's car was there. For a second, he almost sat in the truck and left again. But he had to see her, had to look at her and know this was real. Inside, the house felt too clean, too staged. Like she'd scrubbed every surface to hide the stains she'd made of their life. Hannah was in the kitchen, arms crossed tight over her chest, hair pulled back like she thought looking neat would fix it. "Where were you?" she asked, voice sharp, but her eyes wide like she already knew. Ethan dropped his keys on the counter. Out. She laughed, forced, brittle. "Ethan, we need to talk. I don't know what you think you know, but..." He stepped closer, cutting off her excuses with silence. He watched her mouth tremble, eyes dart to the side, like she was searching for a window to crawl out of. But there wasn't one. "You know what tomorrow is?" he asked calmly. She swallowed. "The barbecue. With your parents. My folks." "Ethan, we can't." "We will," he said. "Everyone's coming. We'll eat, drink, catch up, and then I'll show them what you've been doing behind my back." She flinched, just for a heartbeat, but enough. "Ethan, please." "No." He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it scraped the air between them. "You don't get to beg. Not yet. Tomorrow, you tell the truth, or I do. And you better hope you have enough left to pack your things when it's over." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, but Ethan didn't feel a thing. He brushed past her, grabbed his jacket off the chair, and left the kitchen cold behind him. Tomorrow, the truth would spill, and there'd be no mopping it up. Ethan spent the day like a ghost in his own house, packing up clothes he knew he'd never wear here again, pulling old photos from frames and tossing them face down on the dresser. Every corner of the house felt like it had a secret now. The hallway where he'd kissed Hannah goodnight 1,000 times. The bedroom closet that still smelled faintly of her perfume. The back porch where Hank used to sit on warm evenings, sipping beer and telling stories that all sounded like lies now. Hannah stayed out of his way. He heard her muffled sobs behind the bathroom door once. A small, pitiful sound that might have cracked him once upon a time. Now it barely touched him. All he could think about was tomorrow, the backyard, the folding chairs, the smell of charcoal in the air while everything burned in slow motion. That night, Ethan called his mother. He hadn't planned to, but the thought of her showing up blind made his stomach turn. She picked up on the second ring, her soft drawl pulling him back to a time when family meant safety. "Ethan, baby, everything all right? You sound tired." He almost said no, almost told her to stay away, that this wasn't her fight. But she deserved to know too. She deserved to look Hank in the eye and see who he really was. "Ma," he said, voice steady, "tomorrow's barbecue. I need you there." "Of course, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss it. You sound so serious, though." "There's gonna be news," Ethan said. He pictured her frowning into the receiver, worry lines deepening around her eyes. "It's not good. I just didn't want you blindsided." Silence. Then her voice, smaller than he'd ever heard it. "It's about your father, isn't it?" Ethan's throat tightened. He hated that she already knew, that maybe she'd seen cracks too, and patched them over for his sake. "Yeah," he whispered. "It's about him. And Hannah." She didn't ask for details. She just sighed, soft and tired. "All right, baby. I'll be there. We'll stand together." When he hung up, the house felt even emptier. Hannah's suitcase sat by the door, half-packed. She'd been trying to catch his eye all evening, maybe hoping for mercy, or maybe some tiny sign that he'd let her spin another lie. But Ethan wouldn't look at her. Tomorrow, he'd give her all the audience she wanted, and then he'd close the door behind her for good. The morning of the barbecue came bright and too warm for spring, a mocking kind of sun that made the neighborhood look cheerful, even while Ethan's insides felt like a storm about to break. He was up before dawn, standing at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee gone cold in his hands. Outside, the backyard looked exactly like it always did. Patchy grass, the old grill that Hank gave him as a wedding gift, the picnic table Hannah painted blue last summer. Perfect, the same word she'd used for them so many times it made him sick now. Hannah drifted through the house like a ghost. He caught glimpses of her, brushing her hair too carefully, wiping at her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. She didn't try to talk to him. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. By noon, the guests started arriving. Hannah's parents first, her mother, with her potluck casserole and bright fake smile, her father, with a stiff handshake and polite jokes. They hugged Ethan, asked him how work was, if he'd been sleeping okay. He lied, smiled, poured them iced tea. Next came his mother. She stepped out of her old station wagon like she'd aged 10 years overnight. She hugged Ethan so tight it hurt. When she let go, her eyes flicked past him, searching for Hank. "Not here yet," Ethan said, voice low. She just nodded, pressed her lips tight, and joined the others on the patio. Hank showed up last. He strolled up the driveway like a man visiting his favorite son, his good boots on, a six-pack dangling from one hand. He called out a cheerful, "Hey, bud," like nothing had happened, like he hadn't torn the ground out from under Ethan's feet. Ethan didn't answer. He just watched Hank hug Hannah's mother, clap her father on the shoulder. Then Hank turned to Ethan with that same crooked grin. "Smells good out here, huh? You got the ribs going?" Ethan's jaw twitched. "Yeah, Dad. Ribs will be ready soon." They all gathered in the backyard, laughing and chatting while Ethan stood by the grill, flipping meat that tasted like ashes in his mouth. Hannah kept stealing glances at him, her face pale, her hands wringing the hem of her summer dress. When everyone was settled, plates full, drinks in hand, Ethan set the last slab of ribs on the table. He didn't sit down. He pulled his phone from his pocket and cleared his throat. "Before we eat," he said, voice slicing through the chatter, "there's something we need to talk about." The table fell silent. Forks paused midair. Hank looked up, a hint of confusion creasing his brow. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Ethan unlocked his phone. The video Mason sent him cued and waiting. "Watch this," he said, and then he hit play. The silence was brutal. The only sound was the faint hum of the phone speaker as the grainy motel footage filled the screen. Hannah's face, unmistakable, stepping out of a dingy hallway. Hank behind her, hand on her back, their bodies too close to be innocent. The date stamp in the corner glared like a neon sign. March 2nd. Just 2 months ago. Hannah's mother gasped, dropping her fork. Her father sat frozen, eyes wide, head turning between Hannah and Hank like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Ethan's mother just stared at Hank, her husband, as if he were a stranger in her yard. Hank's grin dissolved. He pushed back in his chair, but the phone was still playing. Another clip, another timestamp. Different day, same betrayal. Hannah's face flushed bright red, tears already welling. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked and died in her throat. Ethan didn't say a word. He let the video run until the screen went black, until there was nothing left but the lower of the grill and the summer breeze carrying the scent of burned trust. Hank found his voice first. "Son, this isn't what it looks like." Ethan snapped. "Don't you dare call me that." His voice cut through the yard like a blade. "You think I'm blind? I asked you straight to your face, and you lied to me. Both of you." Hannah reached for him, fingers trembling. "Ethan, please." He stepped back so fast her hand fell to her side. "Don't. Just don't." His mother rose from her chair, her face drawn and pale. She looked at Hank, really looked at him, like she was searching for the man she married 40 years ago and seeing nothing but rot beneath the skin. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "How long?" Hank tried to speak, but no words came. The hush that fell over the yard felt like a funeral. Hannah's father muttered under his breath, shaking his head at his daughter. "We raised you better than this." Hannah sank onto the bench, covering her face. The sound of her muffled sobs didn't touch Ethan at all. He felt like his chest was a hollow drum, echoing with all the things he'd wanted to say, but were too broken to fix now. Ethan's mother stepped forward, resting a hand on his arm, a small gesture that held him up when he felt like he might collapse. "Come inside with me, baby," she said softly. "You don't need to watch this anymore." But Ethan shook his head. He had one more thing to say. One last nail for this coffin. He looked at Hank, then at Hannah, then at everyone gathered around the table that was supposed to feed his family. "You want to stay here?" he said, voice low, deadly calm. "You can't. Neither of you. Pack your things tonight. Be gone tomorrow." No one argued. Not Hank. Not Hannah. Not a soul. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something like peace. Hank didn't try to speak again. He just stared at the dirt under his boots, like maybe he could wish himself back in the ground before he had to face the mess he'd made. Hannah sat hunched over, her shoulders shaking, but the sound of her crying barely reached Ethan. It was like a glass wall had gone up between them, clear enough to see through, impossible to break. Ethan's mother guided him back toward the house. She moved slowly, like she was afraid any sudden step might shatter what was left holding him together. Inside, the hum of the old fridge and the ticking of the clock were the only sounds that felt real. "You did what you had to do," she said once they were alone in the kitchen. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled when she reached for a glass of water. "You did right by yourself." Ethan sank into a chair at the table he'd eaten at 1,000 times, where Hannah used to pour him coffee, where Hank used to laugh about old hunting trips. He stared at the worn wood grain under his fingertips, at the place where all that family comfort used to live. "Did I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His mother nodded. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Not yet." "You did. Now you stand up and don't let them steal one more piece of you." Outside, through the window, Ethan saw Hannah's parents leaving in a rush, faces stiff and pale. Hank sat alone on the bench by the grill, head in his hands, while Hannah hovered near the steps like a ghost who didn't know where to haunt. For a second, pity threatened to crack the shell Ethan had built around his heart. But then he remembered every night she'd lied, every touch that hadn't belonged to him. He remembered his father's easy grin, the way he'd bragged about loyalty, about family, all while sneaking around with the one person who was supposed to stand beside Ethan forever. That pity shriveled and died. His mother rested a hand on his shoulder, squeezing once before letting go. "Let them pack. Tomorrow, you take back this house. This life. You start clean." Ethan breathed in slow, steady. He could do that. He would do that. Whatever came next, it would be his, honest and his alone. Outside, The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard where the last of his old life was falling apart. Tomorrow, he'd wake up in the quiet, and maybe, just maybe, he'd find out what it felt like to stand on ground that couldn't be stolen out from under him again. By the time dawn broke, the house was still and heavy with the hush that comes after a storm. Ethan stood at the kitchen window again, the same place he'd waited the morning before, but this time the weight in his chest felt different. Lighter, maybe. Not healed, but empty to the poison that had been eating him alive. Boxes sat by the door. Hank's old duffel bag. Hannah's half-zipped suitcase. He hadn't heard them packing, but he'd felt it. That uneasy shuffling behind closed doors. Every sound a reminder that they were stripping themselves out of his life piece by piece. He stepped outside onto the porch just as the sky turned pink behind the trees. The air was crisp, and for the first time in months, it smelled like promise instead of dread. Hannah came out first, eyes red, cheeks blotchy from a night of crying. She paused at the top step, suitcase handle clenched tight. For a heartbeat, she looked like she might speak, like she might toss him one last desperate plea. But the words died on her tongue when she saw his face, calm, unmoved. She lowered her eyes and stepped past him. Hank followed, slower, older than he'd looked just days ago. He carried his bag over one shoulder, head bowed. He stopped on the porch, turned like he wanted to say something. Maybe to explain, maybe to beg for forgiveness. But Ethan didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just held his father's gaze until Hank dropped his eyes too, stepped down the steps, and crossed the yard without another word. They loaded their things into Hank's truck. Hannah's shoulders trembled as she climbed in. Hank glanced back once at the house, the home he'd helped build and then ruin. Then the engine sputtered to life. The tires rolled across the gravel, and they were gone. Ethan stood there until the truck was nothing but a blur at the end of the road. The wind rustled the trees above him, carrying the soft echo of a world that was finally his again. Inside, the house felt bigger than it ever had. Empty, but not hollow. Clean, in a way he'd almost forgotten a life could feel. His mother stepped in from the kitchen, handing him a cup of coffee, warm and steady in his hands. "You all right, baby?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I will be." He stepped out onto the porch again, coffee in hand, feeling the morning sun on his face. There would be hard days ahead, and nights that felt too quiet, too wide. But there would also be mornings like this, honest, unburdened by lies. And that was enough. If you want more raw stories like this, subscribe, leave a comment below, and share your thoughts. Thank you for listening to The Truth.